You're listening to the Entrepreneur's Agony Aunt podcast, keeping it real, telling the story like it is, because there are no mistakes that somebody else hasn't already made. Hello, I'm Vicky Brock, and you're listening to the Entrepreneur Agony Aunt podcast. My guest this week is Leah Hutcheon, friend, inspiration, and founder, CEO of Appointedd, an online booking and scheduling software for businesses of any size. Appointedd launched the world's first truly seamless multi-time zone booking system. So no surprise then that this Edinburgh-based company won International Growth Business of the Year in 2016, and that Leah was recently named UK Small Business Entrepreneur of the Year. So welcome, Leah.
Hi.
So I don't mean this in a particularly braggy way, but between you and I, we must be the most award-strewn pair of entrepreneurs to grace the Agony Aunt sofa yet. And we had our own TV series, of course, well, which is really slightly weird.
Yes.
Do you feel better after that very grand introduction?
Well, the pressure is on. Hopefully I have something worthy to say.
Oh, I think the pressure of the awards thing is quite ridiculous. It's partly why I did this podcast, because I hate being that person that everybody else feels a failure measured up against when you know day in, day out how badly you're screwing up. So one of the things I do try to do with this podcast is have open and honest conversations with the people that some of the listeners might be seeing all the time appearing to be getting it right. Because I think we learn more from our mistakes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep it to one question this week because it's quite a big question. So here we go. When I started my company, I was very inexperienced and I surrounded myself with lots of advisors. Much of that advice turned out to be questionable, to say the least, and these days I have very little time for it, preferring to trust my gut. My chairman recently accused me of being unwilling to listen, and while I don't think that I've gone too far the other way, I would really appreciate any tips on separating the good advice from bad, and also how to better handle input from my board and investors that I think is plain wrong. See, I promise I didn't write it. I promise I didn't write it. But before we dive in, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your journey so far as CEO, entrepreneur, and general inspiration.
Well, yeah, that one doesn't big me up too much and make me feel totally imposter syndrome ridden. Yes, so I founded Appointedd back in 2011, which is a million years ago now.
I think, I was thinking 200, but a million is probably more accurate.
Totally. It feels, well, both a million and 2 minutes ago as well at the same time. And I think that's the really weird thing, isn't it? The time becomes elastic, and in some ways you're really proud of everything you've done in that time, and in other ways you're like, geez, how the hell has that been 6 years? Like, I should have done more 7 years now. You know, how have I not taken over the world, and how have we not done this, and insert, you know. So 2011, and since then we've built a team, we've launched our product, we have some fantastic customers that we're really proud to be working with, and proud to be adding value to their lives. We enable businesses of any size, so it's right from solo photographers or small hair salons right up to global enterprise clients, and we enable them to take bookings from their website, their Facebook page, their intranet, really any online presence. And we have some really smart cross-time zone technology that allows us to really stand out to the global enterprise. So it's been an amazing journey. We're learning lots every day and realising that we should have done things differently, or if we'd have done this, but I think the question is a really, really good one. I think it is so hard. You don't know who to trust, who to listen to, who knows best in these situations. And I think especially at the early days, it's brutal, isn't it? I mean, we were in Entrepreneurial Spark together at the same time.
We were.
And that was fantastic. I think the biggest thing I got out of eSpark was being surrounded by other entrepreneurs. That, I think those are the people. So if I was to give a really short answer, it's like, listen to the other people doing exactly the same as you are, because they're the ones who will be totally honest with you. Their wisdom is hard won, because it'll generally come out of them having either made a mistake or gotten something right and it being a lucky fluke or whatever. So,
I think that was my first reaction to the first part of that question, was that, I mean, I heard you a few weeks back giving evidence in Parliament. You were in the session before me. I heard you talking about, you'd had advice from formal business advisors in the early days that was damaging, actually, because if you'd listened to it, it would have capped your ambition. It would have made you believe that the very core of your business, the amazing USP that you have, the reason that you're nailing it, is because you've got this multi-time zone global perspective and you're scheduling meetings all over the world, and that's incredible. But you were getting advice at the very beginning which almost told you to stop being such a silly, ambitious girl and focus on nailing East Edinburgh first or something, before you go global.
Much. And I think the worry is, exactly as you say, that advice can sometimes come from agencies who are there and who, at the early stages, you absolutely trust because you believe that they're set up by people who have been there and done it. And so, of course, you're going to trust them because they're the ones who know what they're doing, right? But obviously you then find out, or it's not even about finding out. I think it's the benefit of hindsight. So you look back, when I was answering that question in Parliament and talking about it, that's the scary thing to me, is now knowing what I know and knowing that you don't know very little at all, of course, you get here, but you look back and you think the amount of times that the business could have gone under had I have listened. So we were told to focus very locally in Edinburgh. I was told by one person if we were going to have, and this is when the business model was very different, but the plan in the early days had been to have a booking site where people could land and they could browse and book different, and it was salons, so it was very vertical based, and browse and book different salons. And I was told, well, there's no point in doing that unless you're also going to sell hair products, so you must sell shampoos, and maybe you could come up with your own range of shampoos. And I think now, how would you ever tell somebody who's building software to also make shampoo? It's like the loopiest thing in the world. But somehow that was seen to be the right advice for me.
And that's the interesting thing, is that once you talk, there's just this distinction between the generic advisor who's learnt this stuff from a book and who maybe has one narrow piece of experience. Perhaps they've worked in a corp. They have certain skills. I'm not to denigrate the skills of advisors, but I think when you're starting up, at each point of your business challenges and your business's growth, there's different phases where you need advice, but the best advice I have ever had has come from people that have been there and done it and who are a few steps ahead of me. The best thing I feel in some ways that agencies or advisors or facilitators could do for you is have these people on speed dial and go, you know what, actually, I know somebody 4 years ahead of you who did exactly this thing. I'll connect you. Now, that would be priceless. Absolutely. That, of course, doesn't come with a day rate or is not the way that an advisor would make a living being a professional advisor. And, of course, those entrepreneurs, nor are they trying to make their money that way. The best advice I got of this type was, from somebody, and she was just like 4 or 5 years ahead, and she just, after 1 hour on a Skype with me, she mapped out exactly where my business was, exactly where it was going wrong. You need to start thinking about defensive moats. You need to start becoming more of a software as a service because you're actually still difficult to set up. She just nailed it. And she worked with me over a period of months, and it was just brilliant. Whereas, nobody told me to go build shampoo. That's probably because at the time I started up my last company, I don't think I owned a hairbrush.
Brilliant.
I think actually it's purely down to my chair in my last business, who's very glamorous, that I ever invested in a hairbrush.
Fantastic.
So nobody was going to tell me to go into beauty products, but it's bonkers. But I can see why, if you've learned all this stuff and you have this very reductive view of what a business is ever going to be able to achieve. You and I came through an incubator. We both talked about world domination. I said it last night, go big or get fired, and she hadn't planned to get fired and planned to go big. But nevertheless, the ambition was a noble one.
You executed.
I executed on my plan.
Sorry.
No, it's completely true. I am not a failure. I totally delivered on the plan.
All good.
But I suppose it perhaps, at the time we were setting up, was quite unusual for some of the old school advisors to have people like us wander in or be pointed at their office and go, right, I'm going to build this global technology software business.
And I think that's fine. And I think you're totally, totally right that startups, and especially in 2011, where it was more nascent, certainly in Scotland, wasn't it? And there was more traditional advice around. There wasn't so much of the software global startups, that side of things. But I think this is one of the things, and probably is a nuance in the question here. There's well-meaning advice that's just a little bit maybe outdated, or maybe somebody's kind of reaching a bit too far for the advice that they should be giving. And then there's actually really damaging advice that hasn't particularly been thought of. And I think the two are very different, aren't they? And the majority of it is well-meaning, so that's all good. But it's quite, I think, a responsibility on the entrepreneur to navigate all of that, and that's really, really hard. Do you think you're right with what you say about other startups? I was lucky enough to be at dinner that was arranged by EIE, and Nigel Eccles and Leslie Eccles were there, and I was chatting to Leslie.
Founders of FanDuel.
FanDuel founders. And I was chatting to Leslie, who's been really supportive of me and of Appointedd in the past. And so she brought Nigel over, and I was really excited about a partnership deal that we were in the closing stages of. And Nigel just turned around and went, "Won't do anything." And Leslie was like, "Nigel, don't say that." And he was like, "No, I just don't think it will." And I was like, "Do you know what? This is really helpful." I was like, "You might be right. We're knee deep in it, and we're going to do it because it's super exciting." And actually, he was right.
Yeah.
You know, a year down the line, we still hadn't managed to pull anything off on it. And that instinct has come hard won from him navigating with FanDuel what partnerships and what that looks like. And so he had that gut instinct. And most advisors haven't won that gut instinct, because most people who have aren't then advising. And yeah, it's wonderful when people are. I mean, I think we are lucky in Scotland that there's a really good network of those there's a blossoming sort of ecosystem, I think.
Yeah, and I think in a way that is like, you know, people always talk about Silicon Valley, but it's the same effect. It's when you've got a cluster of people who are only a few degrees of separation away from not just the rock stars, but the people, the walking cautionary tales. And, you know, people just at different phases who've gone through different phases of growth. I think when you're in an ecosystem that you can reach to those people indirectly. I mean, I was approached by somebody who I don't know, who knows somebody that I know, to talk to an entrepreneur in distress. And from the entrepreneur being in distress to me being on the phone with him, even though I didn't know him, took about 5 hours. Yeah. Because it was somebody called, somebody saw, somebody called me. And that is what you get from those ecosystems.
Totally. And how valuable is that? I mean, that's amazing. Like, the amount of impact that you will have made on that person. And I think what is lovely as well that you see in the ecosystem is somebody benefits from that, and they will then go out of their way to give it to somebody else. And
absolutely. Yeah. Indirect reciprocity is hugely important. And I think the person asking the question, he or she said, "I've got very little time for this advice anymore. I tend to trust my gut." Yeah. And I think trusting your gut is experience, and that's correct until your path becomes uncharted. And I found that, yes, you start to nail a phase. Like, I've got this whole startup phase nailed, or I've got this raising seed money nailed. And it's then when you move up a gear to the next phase that the path becomes blank again. Yeah. And that's sort of, I think that's where I made mistakes and perhaps should have taken more advice, although it be relevant advice.
And that's the hard thing, isn't it? When that kind of gear shift happens, you need a whole new set of advisors. You don't have the gut instinct because you've not done that bit before. You don't necessarily know who to turn to, and that's really hard, isn't it? And that's when mistakes happen. And I think a lot of the time, I remember you shared a blog post with me years ago, I mean, this will be 5 years ago probably now, about recognising the different stages that you're at emotionally in your business.
Oh, yeah.
And I think those change points are also emotional change points. So you're kind of at your most vulnerable, aren't you? And you've got to restart this whole, who do you look to for advice? What does your gut say? Well, does your gut know anything? And
you're at your most vulnerable when you're at your highest and your lowest, I think. Because I think the high is a danger point too. Because the high is that, I don't know, when you've felt that, the high is when you've kind of come off the back, usually of raising money or closing a deal or something, and you almost just have to throw yourself at executing. And that's a danger, that you just hurl yourself uninformed down the wrong path. Yeah. And the other place is like when you're at the bottom of that trough and you almost, I don't know, I say you, I certainly felt this, almost paralysed by conflicting advice, everybody telling me what I should do, when actually what I really needed was somebody to do it for me.
Yeah.
Or at least come help me,
Yes.
at least roll up their sleeves
Yeah.
with me and get stuck into something,
Yeah.
anything. And I think that there is a risk your businesses get the wrong shaped, especially when you're underfunded.
Yeah.
Your businesses get the wrong shape.
Well, I think it's really easy. You hit the nail on the head there, that you need somebody to come in and get involved in action. There is a magic in action, isn't there? People can talk to you and advise you, but if it constantly comes down to there's only you to execute it, there's only so much you can do. And the more advice you get, quite often, it doesn't even have to be conflicting, can it? It just becomes multifaceted, and then you get to the point where you definitely can't execute it because it stopped being one simple thing you need to do and it's a list of 12 things. And it's so easy to get paralysed in that point, and that's, I guess, when advice becomes actually really dangerous, and you're better off just not doing anything. You're better off not having any advice and just cracking on and doing something.
And I think the graph I'm talking about, I'll stick it in a link when I release this episode. I think it comes from Ben Horowitz's Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is one of my absolute favourite books.
Yeah.
If you haven't read that book, read that book. It's all about, how it's okay to screw up constantly as a CEO because everybody else is. And the benchmark is much lower than you think it is.
Yeah.
So it's really quite comforting in that respect. I think it talks about what actions you should or shouldn't take when you're at these peaks and troughs. And I found, when I was at my lowest or most stressed out and most data coming in at me, it's almost all you can do is something really tiny and binary, even if it's, I am going to go to Greg's and get sausage rolls.
Yeah.
Or I am going to do this one unimportant thing, and when I've done it, I'm going to go, yay, I've actually done something.
Yeah.
Because it becomes like this maelstrom of input.
Yeah.
And you're like this little blockage. Leah's currently nodding at me and looking like she's in a maelstrom of input. That's why I'm talking so much in this episode.
Sorry, I am doing a lot of
okay.
nodding. But it's so true. It's so true. And that, I remember Jim Duffy used to say, you're in the grip. And it's like, yeah, that is it. You are absolutely in the grip of it. How you get out of that, it's absolutely your responsibility to get yourself out of it. And like you say, if that's going to Greg's, then it's going to Greg's. Or if it's going and filing something, doing something that allows you to get through it and feel good about yourself and feel like you've done something. Go and change your signing permissions in the bank, or something that somebody else has to do all of the hard work for you, and you get to feel you've taken something off your list.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Even writing a very short list, just so you can cross things off it.
Yeah, I'm really bad
And
at
there's
that.
been moments when I have literally, the first thing on my list has been write a list, and I'm like, yes,
I've done it.
I've done it. I'm ruling this whole CEO thing.
Whatever works. I think that is what you have to realise as well, isn't it? Is literally, it is about getting to the next stage, however you get there, and if you can get there with some positive action, then all the better. It doesn't need to be taking on the world, it doesn't need to be going global or whatever. It's about putting one foot in front of another, keeping waking up every day and having the balls to go back out and do it. And and to take advice and be brave enough to follow that advice, but also to be brave enough to say, no, that isn't for me.
And that's the interesting thing, because the second part of that question, which is actually how to better handle input from my board and investors, that I think is wrong. I don't know if I'm the best person to advise on that. My response to that wasn't immediately end up getting resigned. My response to that for a longest time was to try to work on that, try to listen, try to adapt. But there came a point where, as you say, I had to say no. Now, my feeling for this just depends on the structure of your board, the relationships with the board, less about how much of the share cap you still own and more about the voting rights of the board, of whether this is going to succeed or not, and how much say your investors do or don't have on that board. Yeah. And I've talked before how my biggest mistake was losing control of the structure. Yeah. So that meant once I got to the point where we were on fundamentally different paths, the only way I could say no was to resign. But I still think that's the right thing to do. If you fundamentally can't support that input and go, we cannot agree with each other, then you're down to the legal structure that that's been baked in. Most people don't wind up in that position, I hope.
No.
I mean, there must be other ways of either gracefully rejecting advice or gracefully hearing it and going, yes, and changing the subject. Is there anything that's working for you?
I think we're super lucky. I've got a fantastic board, and we generally have the same approach to things, and that can be bad as well, because we do challenge each other, and there's definitely rigorous challenge there, and there's definitely difference of opinion at times, but by and large, on the big things for the business, we're aligned. I think there's a lot of things through my board experience so far. There's a lot of things outside of that board and intrinsic in the business that if they're going right, the board stuff can go right, and if they're not, they wouldn't. So we've had a great run the last year where we found a real product market fit in a market that is a market where people want to spend money. So we're starting to get that really nice, we're getting some inbound from big enterprise clients, we're getting marketing campaigns that we're doing are really landing a punch, and so we're just too bloody busy to...
And the needle's moving in the right direction on the metrics that it's supposed to be.
Totally.
And so probably in some ways the scrutiny's off you on a minute-to-minute basis.
Exactly. The scrutiny is there and the rigour is there, but it's on very positive things because we're building big contracts, or we're putting together pitches for big deals, or, so the board are very busy and very involved in the business, but in a positive way. And I think if we were in a place where that was difficult, and if we were in a place where things weren't going well, who knows how we would be, because I have put a lot of trust in my board. And I think when you sit and look at the legal structure that you're in, you are often in a vulnerable position, aren't you? And I think not enough is done around the education of that in an early stage, so that you're protecting early. There'll be healthy debate. We've got very different backgrounds as a board. I think one of the things that I'm really lucky with, our chairman, Kenny Fraser, came on board very early in the startup journey. So he got involved before we did our first fundraising round. He was really interested in getting involved and championed me and helped me through that process. So he's been in since the very early days, and we've grown the company together as a board, and there was just the two of us for an awful long time on the board. So it's very operational, it's very hands-on. There's a nuance there of just understanding. Kenny knows all of the team really well. He's part of the team. It's not, the board isn't separate to the company, and I think that is then so helpful in being able to have those disagreements and to know that, well, actually, there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of kind of small people. Our other board director, Paul Reed, was our interim CEO whilst I was on maternity leave last year. So, again, very operational in the business, understands the challenges in the business, understands the opportunities in the business, and so just we are a working board. It's not something that I go and report to or look to for permission. It's, they know what's going on in a day in, day out. I can pick up the phone to them and be like, so this has happened and the world has fallen to pieces, or, amazing, this has happened and we got that signed, and they just know that. So I think probably if I had any advice out of that is choose wisely and then involve them as much as you can operationally in the business, so that it's not about asking for permission and as far as possible, or asking for advice from an external standpoint. As far as possible, you're just in the trenches together and they're just part of the team, because then it's not advice, it's you just working it out together.
That actually is really good advice, because I think that if you're in the position where you're going for permission, or your board is like really far away from the day-to-day, then that's when you get that gulf of, they don't know what they're talking about, therefore I'm not going to listen.
Yeah.
Like, why should I listen? Because they haven't got anything valuable to say, except these people that control the strategic direction of the company. So if you, as the CEO or founder, don't think your board has got anything valuable to say, you may have the wrong board, which is a big problem.
Yeah.
Or, you may need to be doing a heck of a lot more work as a group to get much more engaged, involved and informed about the detail of the business, not just the strategic direction, but the whole operational way that it's working. That's really, really interesting. We both grew our businesses, I would say, from an underfunded position.
Yep.
Yeah. But let's talk about the challenges of growing a team, especially a skilled management team around you. I mean, you had the challenge of being on maternity leave and bringing in an interim CEO. I mean, I can't imagine how difficult that is. As you've gone through this whole process, has there been a process that you have developed to hire, to get the right rate? Made any mistakes in the way?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, we've made mistakes. And again, this is like I've learned from my board. So Kenny has a saying, if it's a maybe, it's a no. And it's like that has been such a good thing for me to have as our due north when made mistakes. And when we have made mistakes, he's kind of laughed at me and been like, oh no, that's not as bad as the mistake I made back when I hired this person or, one of my colleagues made. So, knowing that you're going to make mistakes, people can wow you and then not deliver or whatever. So that's fine, but be picky, and if it's a maybe, it's a no. Reaching out to our network has been the biggest thing. So we've hired a lot through either recommendations, if somebody's worked with somebody before. We hired Greg, one of our senior developers, came to us because he was the cousin of an intern who we loved, and she was like, my cousin's brilliant, and came in and interviewed, and he was just amazing. So those strokes of luck that you get, and that go on to transform a product, a lot of it is not helpful, because how do you replicate that? But
it's helpful in its look beyond what's on your doorstep, and look beyond the
recruiters
obvious.
Don't feel, I've put an advert on LinkedIn, it hasn't brought me the right person. But the network thing, I think, consistently has been the strongest, and that, as you say, bringing in Paul as interim CEO, it's not without its risks, is it? And
it's terrifying. Honestly, you look so calm as you say that. Honestly, that must have been terrifying.
It was and it wasn't. So it came out of, we hadn't planned on doing it, and then we had some really exciting commercial opportunities. I was only taking 3 months maternity leave, so we'd said, the team's wonderful, they're all over it, let's not worry about it. The active board, great team. I'm not disappearing off the face of the earth. I'm going to have a baby.
Yeah,
I'll be
it's
in.
not
it's
like
grand.
you're kind of in a coma or anything.
Exactly. So we decided that, and then just things really hotted up commercially, and it was like, actually, we don't want anything to slow down here, and we're already a team working at full capacity plus. So actually, there needs to be somebody in this role, and so we started talking to our investors, the board, and just exploring, and Paul Reed works closely with one of our investors who's been very helpful and generous with his time and advice to me. So he'd come kind of recommended. Paul, on the flip side, had been really excited to hear about the opportunity at Appointedd. He'd built and exited his own startup and was ready to kind of jump in and get operational in something, and thought that the opportunity at Appointedd was exciting. So we met, and literally, he's one of the nicest people in the world. So straight away, it was so easy. And I said that to him. I was like, oh, yeah, so everybody says you're so lovely. And he was very self-effacing. And he was like, yes, I pay everyone a lot of money to say that. But it was just straight away, the energy was good. And there was a kind of, he'd been there and done it. So again, it comes back to trusting other entrepreneurs. It's like, you're not dangerous because you know how hard this is. It's the biggest thing.
Honestly, the more you say it, the more I realise it. Probably all of my mistakes, the single biggest thing is, have they been there and done it, and how recently? Yeah. Because actually, if it was the 1980s and the 1990s, that's a long while ago now.
Things have changed a lot since, and you've probably forgotten how hard it is, because these things. But Paul was fresh out of it. He knew, he understood all of that. Just the way we talked about things, the questions he asked, I just knew straight away that it was the right fit, and we didn't actually end up seeing anybody else. It was like, cool, if you're up for it, we're up for it. And so he joined the board, and he was amazing, and the team loved him. And, you know, we're hiring at the moment, and one of the team said, well, if we could have had Paul as our sales director, though. And I was like, I know, but we can't. He's got other stuff going on. So, you know, he's left such a lasting impression.
Yep.
And yeah, was absolutely the right fit. So I guess that's an area of trusting your gut, of like reaching out to the network, going as wide as you can. But when you meet somebody and you know it feels good, just going for it.
And the interesting thing is we're talking feeling, talking gut, and really that comes back to values, who you are as people, what you care about, how you treat other people, respect, all of this kind of thing. And I think where I've made the biggest mistakes, because you can be like wowed and entranced by people, or you can do the maybes, you can go, well, you know what, I don't like them, but on paper they check all the boxes, and maybe I'm being biased here. You know, maybe I'm the one who's not giving this person who's ticks all the boxes and is clearly competent fair try. All of my mistakes have been in that area.
Exactly, that's what I was just going to say. And so if it's a maybe, it's a no, and that's it, isn't it? It's like every time I think back, and you're saying the same. It's those times where you've gone, shush, I'm probably being stupid. It's everyone else thinks it's a good shout, so it must be a good shout. And I don't know whether it's an energy thing or what, but it just never works when you think that.
Yeah, and because you have to get psychically married. Well, more than married. Totally. I mean, I saw way more of my team than I did of my partner.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's huge, isn't it?
It's just a massive amount of time and energy and emotional. If you're not synced on that same emotional roller coaster, or that other person can't recognise where you are on it, you're not going to deliver efficiently together.
Totally. And that's it, isn't it? At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's about delivering on your plans, delivering on what life throws at the business and all of that. And if you haven't got a stable base to that, then you're not going to be able to deliver in the way that you could have done. So actually, it is all about feelings and all of that. But it's also just really good business sense to do it.
I think the interesting thing is when people are faking the syncing with you, or they're faking the value, it doesn't take very long to see them in the team and how they treat other people.
No.
Particularly your most junior members of staff.
Yes.
And that's where it comes through.
Absolutely.
And it's like, you know, they might have invested a bit of effort into pulling the hood over you, and you might have fallen for it.
Yeah.
Happens all the time. You know, people I'll get good at that over the course of their life. So it's not worth beating yourself up that you got fooled. But as soon as you see the evidence that other people are being treated without respect or without compassion or against the values that you baked into the company, you have to act. Because it doesn't go away.
No. And I think that's it, isn't it? That's something I've learned over time is you do have to act on these things, and that's not always easy. It's sometimes you're saying you need to act straight away, sometimes you need to prepare to act straight away and all of that, but you do have to have an eye to it, don't you, because it doesn't go away. Once you get that little inkling, generally, I've never had a situation where you go, oh, I'm so glad I didn't do something about that.
I'm so glad I ignored it, because it just magically all got better on its own.
Exactly. Said no one ever.
Actually, maybe that should be my next business. I should make a drug which just makes everything magically get better on its own.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think that could be good. So I'm very mindful of your time, and I appreciate that you're squeezing me into your day. No. But before we wrap up, I wonder if there's, as you say, it's been about 1 million years and 2 minutes since you started in 2011, I started in 2012. And I know I've had the luxury, somewhat enforced, of 6 months to process this. 6 months to think about what I would do differently. 6 months to have the luxury of writing and thinking and blogging and podcasting about what I've learned. And you have had no moments to breathe ever in any way, shape or form. So it's a tough question. But is there anything that you've learned now that you feel, if you'd known at the beginning, could have cut time or money off this whole process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, everything we've talked about today are those hard-won kind of wisdom points. And I think, if we knew them all when, if they were just intrinsic and we knew them, that would have been great. I think the other side for us has been that product market fit piece where, you've talked so eloquently about it before, just how important it is and how much you have to nail it before any of the magic is going to happen. And I think you can't just say, so I would have gotten to product market fit quicker, because that isn't the way it works, is it? But I think for us, had we have looked to the larger enterprise side of the market sooner and understood how our features could really stand out in that context, that would have been a wonderful thing, because actually it's felt like pushing a boulder up a hill and then it doesn't, and it's like, oh, now we're getting some traction.
And that's actually the market side of product market fit. That's are we targeting the right niche market segment, especially as our beachhead market, are we going after the right user group? That's interesting.
And it's hard, isn't it? So for us, it changed a lot, even to get to, being online booking, kind of B2B only, software as a service, all of those things that are absolutely baked into our model were very different to where the idea was in the very first instance. So that in itself was a journey. And so then to take that to where your niche is, and I think it's so easy to kind of find your beachhead market as if it's like something you do really early at the beginning.
Step 4, I think in Bill Owlett's 24 Steps of Disciplined Entrepreneurship, which I am a disciplined entrepreneur and follow, I think it's about step 4.
Really early, isn't it?
Really early.
And it's like, that isn't, and it would be amazing. So yes, it would be wonderful, but almost, I would have it happen at step 4, but I'm definitely not beating myself up that it hasn't happened at that point. But how wonderful if you can get to that and get to that through more mindful study of your business and of the market. I am of the opinion that a lot of the time you have to go through a lot to get to that. It isn't just as easy as deciding something is going to be, you have to be in it, and you have to be knee deep and know your product and be speaking to people. And you don't get to speak to global enterprises without having a product that really can stand up.
Oh, definitely not. You can't go out with your PowerPoint deck and you kind of lean MVP and take that to a big multi-site enterprise. And I learned recently a lovely definition of startup, which is Steve Blank's definition, which is a startup is a temporary organisation in search of a replicable business model. And I think we almost, in our rush to get past being a startup and a grown-up company and a grown-up CEO as well, I know I fell from this one, I've got to get past this. You start worrying about all of these problems of process and scale and HR and investment and all of these further along problems, and it's really easy to forget you're still a temporary organisation in search for a replicable business model because you haven't nailed it yet.
And I think the challenges of that is you become reliant on outside forces to keep you alive whilst you find that out. But I think Scotland's getting much better at doing that, and I think, again, we have more entrepreneurs investing in businesses who understand that I need to put some money in and I need to give them as much wisdom as I can, but mainly space space and energy to go and find that out themselves, because nobody knows the product and the market as much as you do. And there's a process to it, and it just has to be done. It can't be shortcutted in a lot of
absolutely. And if you are investing in those companies as an angel, if you're on the board of those companies, you need to understand that this is going to iterate and iterate and iterate. Totally. It is not just kind of add money, add people, and sell the hell out of it. And that's a hard lesson. That's a hard lesson to learn, and I am so glad that you have been able to learn that and get there, and you're still nailing it as CEO. Wow. Whereas I'm practicing to super nail it next time with all of the wisdom that I've learned on the way.
You will totally super nail it next time.
How well will I nail it next time with all of this wisdom? Yeah, exactly.
But that is it. You are doing like, if anybody's going to be able to shortcut it, you are going to be able to shortcut it after.
Especially now you've given me all the clues.
Well, indeed.
Yes, I shall credit you thoroughly when I'm winning my next, whatever.
In the Oscars.
Inspiring something. So thank you, Leah. You've been listening to Vicky Brock and Leah Hutcheon, this week's Entrepreneur Agony Aunts. As ever, you can submit your question at vickybrock.com/podcast.